Hi everybody, it's Ms. Rachel with Bluegrass Green Source. Today I'm at Mill Creek in Lexington. The Mill Creek is flowing behind me and it's in the West Hickman watershed. We come into the creek to look for macroinvertebrates. Do you remember that word? When I'm trying to figure out what a word means, I like to break it apart. In macroinvertebrate, I hear macro and invertebrate. I know that macro means it's big enough for me to see with my eyes, and invertebrate means something that doesn't have a backbone. We have a backbone that supports us, but lots of animals are invertebrates and they don't. They might have a shell around the outside of their body to help give them some shape and protection. Macroinvertebrates that live in the water are really special and important and can teach us lots of things about the water. Depending on what kind we find, we might know that our water is really healthy or maybe not so healthy. We sort those macroinvertebrates into 3 different groups. Group 1 can only live in really clean water. So if we find those in our creek, we know that our water is really clean. The Group 2 macroinvertebrates can live in creeks with a little bit of pollution. So if we find them, we still feel pretty good about our water quality. The Group 3 macroinvertebrates can live in any kind of water. It might be really clean water, but they can also live in water that has a lot of pollution. So if we're only finding those macroinvertebrates, we might know that there's something in our water that's not supposed to be there. So let's see what we can find here in our water today. When I come down to the creek to look for macroinvertebrates, I like to wear my gloves, and I also wash my hands after, just because I don't know what's in this water and I want to protect myself. If you wanted to do something like this at home, you should also wear gloves and wash your hands and make sure you have a grown-up with you. So, when we're looking for macroinvertebrates, we want to take a white bucket or something like this and fill it with water from the creek. That's what anything living in the creek is used to. So we would want to make sure that anything we take out of the creek to look at more has the same water. Macroinvertebrates like to live underneath rocks. So often the best way to look for them is just by carefully lifting up a rock and seeing what we can find. I already see lots of little snails living on the bottom of this rock, and I see a different kind of macroinvertebrate that I'll hope you can help me identify here in a minute. Once I've pulled off the macroinvertebrates that I want to look at more, I'm going to make sure I put my rock back down carefully in the creek right about where I found it. Now that I've found some macroinvertebrates, just from glancing really quickly in the creek, I want to try to figure out what they are and what group they are in. Remember we talked about the 3 groups of macroinvertebrates? I want to try to see what I can tell about our water quality just from looking at the macroinvertebrates. So in order to identify the macroinvertebrates, I'm going to use a dichotomous key.
A dichotomous key is like a map or quiz to help people identify different animals. This dichotomous key for macroinvertebrates guides us through different features and body parts the macroinvertebrates might have. We start at the top, and the first question we have to ask ourselves is, does it have a shell or no shell?
So one of the macroinvertebrates that I found was a snail. So I identified it, but we have several different types of snails, and so I'd like to figure out which type it is. So the first question I ask myself, does it have a shell or no shell? If we look closely at our snail, we can tell that it has a shell. So underneath shells, we'll ask ourselves, does it have a single shell or a double shell? Our snail just has one single shell. Underneath single shell, we have 4 options. We have spiral opening on the left, which is not mine. Mine opens on the right. We have spiral opening on the right. That sounds like ours, but let's keep reading our other choices just to make sure. We have a coiled snail, which looks nothing like our snail, and a conical snail, or the shape of a cone, which also does not look like our snail. So it is the spiral opening on the right that's called a gilled snail. I can use my other key for macroinvertebrates that sorts these into the 3 groups to see that a gilled snail is in group 1. It's really sensitive to pollution and found in good quality water. So the fact that I found this gilled snail in Mill Creek so far is a good sign for our water quality. If you watch this little guy down here at the bottom, that's a different kind of macroinvertebrate. We see several of the snails over on this side, but this one is different. So let's see if we can identify it together. Does it have a shell or no shell? It has a little exoskeleton, but it's not a hard shell like our snail had. So we say no shell. The next question we have to ask ourselves is legs or no legs? I can see pretty clearly this guy has lots of legs that are moving about right now. So we have to ask next, 10 or more legs, 4 pairs of legs, or 3 pairs of legs. So let's take a little bit closer look. It might be a little bit hard to see from the camera, but this one does have 10 legs. So looking at the 10 plus legs group, is it lobster-like, shrimp-like and swimming on its side, or walking on the bottom? Here he is. This guy is walking on the bottom mostly. And so we can identify it as an aquatic sow bug or an isopod.
If we look at our other key, isopods are in the group 2 taxa of macroinvertebrates. So they can live in water that is somewhat polluted, but finding them indicates good or fair water quality. This is one of the other macroinvertebrates we found. Let's try to identify it. First, we ask shell or no shell. This one clearly does not have a shell around its body. So, next question. Legs or no legs? I don't see any legs on it. So then we look under no legs. Does it have tentacles or tails? Is it worm-like or is it microscopic? Now microscopic would be very difficult for us to see with our eyes. I'm going to look under worm-like. We have several choices under worm-like, but the first one sounds and looks a lot like what we just found. It has a sucker, it expands and contracts, and its body is segmented. This is a leech. It has a sucker that it's using to hold on with one end, and it grows longer and shorter as it moves in the water. Leeches are one of the macroinvertebrates that are in the group 3 taxa. They can live in water that is polluted, but they can also live in really clean water.
All right, our last one we're going to look at together is right below my finger. It moves around pretty fast there in the water. So let's ask, does it have a shell or no shell? This one does not have a hard shell on the outside of its body. So no shell, legs or no legs. It may be kind of hard for you to see, friends, but it does have a lot of legs and it's moving around down there. So we have to look, 3 pairs of legs, 4 pairs of legs, or 10 or more legs. Again, it may be hard for you to see, but I can tell this one has at least 10 legs. So then I'm looking where my isopod also was. Is it lobster-like? Is it shrimp-like and swim on its side? Or does it walk on the bottom? So if we watch this guy, when it moves around, it swims on its side. It's not walking on the bottom like the isopod is. And it's not lobster-like, so that rules out our crayfish. This one is a scud. Scuds are in the group 2 taxa for macroinvertebrates. So they can live in water that may be a little bit polluted, but they do need pretty clean water to live. So that's another good sign. Friends, we learned a lot together today about water quality and about our creek here at Mill Creek in the West Hickman watershed. Based on our tests that we did and the macroinvertebrates that we found, and looking at the big picture habitat around us, we feel like our water has pretty good quality. It's pretty healthy here. Thanks for joining me.